Okay, well, this is a new week, February 20th through the 25th, and we have been learning about authentic learning, and you've submitted an assignment about that. Now we're going to learn about active learning. Active learning is another element, of course, of the meaningful learning framework. How do we support active learning? And active learning, remember, is not just about learning that is physically active, it's more about mentally activity, as we learn a little bit more about it. So this week's activities, as you look at them, there is supporting active student-centered learning with an interactive whiteboard. This is the reading, and it has a textbook that I've written, and it talks about different types of software that you have available to you that you can support active learning with an interactive whiteboard. And so there's a section that you can read, and you can actually click on these little videos that show you how to build activities to support active learning with Smart Notebook software as well as Active Inspire software for the Promethean board. So if you are a current teacher, then you'll want to, well, everyone will want to watch these because you're going to have to do an assignment that supports some active learning with interactive whiteboard software. It also talks about supporting active learning with classroom response systems. And those can be independent of interactive whiteboard software, or they can be combined with that. So you want to learn all you can about supporting active learning in anticipation of an assignment due in a week or two. So that's one thing that you'll want to do, and you can again click on all the videos to watch them and learn more about how to support interactive or active learning with an interactive whiteboard and with classroom response systems. So that's one thing to do this week, is to spend some time in that reading. It's going to take a little while to go through the different videos and watch those as well as read the text there. And then for the discussion this week, it gears you up for the assignment as well too. It says for the active interactive whiteboard assignment, you're required to choose an existing lesson plan that you have created and or taught to your students, and then add some interactive whiteboard activities that support active learning to it. So for this discussion this week, go out online and seek out some best practices for supporting active learning using an interactive whiteboard. Be sure to search within an area of interest to your current situation, whether it's interactive whiteboard activities for the kindergarten classroom, interactive whiteboard activities for secondary math, etc. Whatever it is, search those out and then post a link to the website or video or whatever you found, and also respond to 2 other students' posts. And not just post a link, but also talk about what you found. What were some of the takeaway points that you read from this source? So it's an opportunity for you to read and to also search for information about that this week. So those are the activities for this week. It's pretty simple, but we're gearing up toward an activity that comes, or the assignment that comes up. So let's take a look at that assignment. Next week we'll talk about makerspaces. And then on March 6th through 11th, that's our spring break week, but that is the week that this assignment is due, the Active Interactive Whiteboard Project. And it's due March 11th. And so there it is. For this project, choose an existing lesson plan that you have created and or taught to your students. So it's assuming that you're a teacher. If you're not a classroom teacher, there are alternative assignments, which I'll talk about in a minute. Your job is to add some interactive whiteboard activities that support active learning. Remember that active learning involves students manipulating their environment and observing the effects. And this can lead to learning as long as students are thinking about the results of their actions on the environment. And the challenge is to implement this new lesson in your class and reflect upon the experience. Again, if you're not a classroom teacher, there are some alternatives that I'll mention. So what you'll include is the original unchanged lesson plan, the interactive whiteboard file that was created and used for this new lesson, whether that's a Smart Notebook file or a Promethean Active Inspire file or a class flow from Promethean. If you use that file, that's fine. And then you're also going to include the updated lesson plan that now includes use of the interactive whiteboard, including a lesson title and summary, list of content standards and objectives, description of learners including grade and subject, list of materials and technologies used by the teacher and students, a list of learning activities that would be completed during the lesson with a detailed description of each activity. So that's your timeline of instruction. A description of how active learning is supported in the lesson using an interactive whiteboard. Now that's something that a lot of people forget for this assignment, is to include just a separate paragraph or two about how active learning is supported in the lesson. How are students manipulating environmental things or manipulating their environment and observing the effects? And then you're going to include an assessment plan and then a reflection upon the experience of teaching this new lesson to your class. And it asks you to discuss and list a few successes, challenges, and ideas for redesign. And then there's a rubric below. You can check that out about how you'll be graded, but again, you can find this assignment under March 6th through 11th, the spring break week. So be aware there is an assignment there due March 11th. And of course, you've got a few weeks from today to do that, so you can always do it during this week or the next week as well if you don't want to work during the spring break week. But I think that what happens is that most of you actually don't have spring break during that week. Kind of weird how it works with Northern State and other school districts around. Why can't we all just agree to have 1 week off for spring break? Anyway, so those are the activities for this week. Let me talk about alternatives for this assignment. So there are a couple of different alternatives you can do. Instead of implementing and reflecting upon the experience, you can do the rest of the assignment where you actually take an old lesson plan, and this lesson plan again can be one, maybe you don't have a previous lesson plan that you've created, so maybe you can find one that someone else has created and use that as your original lesson plan and then add your own interactive whiteboard items onto that. And if you create these items in Smart Notebook software or Active Inspire, which by the way is software that you can download for free and install for free. There's a 60-day version, I think, of both of them. Then you can design a lesson that has some active learning in it, or design a few lessons that have some active learning in them, and then include a notebook or a Smart Notebook software file in the assignment like it has, but just submit that to me. And also maybe mention a few sources that you've read, maybe 3 to 5 sources about interactive whiteboard best practices, and tell a little bit about how you've included those best practices into your assignment. So instead of actually implementing or doing the implementation part of this assignment, instead read a few articles about best practices for interactive whiteboards in your area, and then talk about how those are exhibited in the notebook file plans. Another alternative is if you are not planning on being a teacher or not ever going to, or maybe you're an administrator or something like that, is instead to write a literature review paper on best practices with interactive whiteboards and include about 7 sources of these best practices, with 4 of those sources being primary sources, meaning 4 of those sources should be a review of a research report on interactive whiteboard implementation and what was the research findings by using those interactive whiteboards or using the interactive whiteboard in the classroom. So those are some alternatives to the assignment. You could do a literature review paper, or you could do the lesson plan and all the other parts of the assignment as it's written here. But instead of implementing it in a classroom, if you don't have a classroom, you can instead cite some sources for best practices, 3 of those at least, and then talk about how your design fits those sources, or those suggestions on best practices. So that's the assignment. Now, if you have any questions about that, feel free to email me and ask me about some alternatives and so forth if you want to do an alternative, one of these ones that I've mentioned. All right, so for this week we are talking about active learning. I wanted to remind you a little bit about this kind of learning that we have. And so as we think about active learning, let me go back a little bit here. We remember that naturally we learn about and adapt to our environment even when we don't have formal instruction. And we interact with our environment. You think about kids playing with something, they're interacting with their environment. They're trying things out, manipulating things, and observing the effects that they make and making our own interpretations of the results. That's what kids do, right? That's what we do naturally. So here are a few examples of kids playing. On the top right, there's a child who's playing with some toys and kind of manipulating those toys to see how they'll fit together and then observing what the results of those interactions are. And down on the bottom left you have that as well with a car, seeing where the car will roll and what it will do. So for active learning to take place, learners must be actively manipulating objects and parameters of the environment. In other words, they have to be doing something. That's why they call it active learning, is because learners are actually manipulating something. And on the interactive whiteboard, it works quite well, right? Because students can come up and touch something, move something. Or as an alternative to the interactive whiteboard for active learning, you could also do some classroom response systems, right? Where students respond to some questions that you answer. Maybe each classroom member has a response, a clicker, or you use a program or an app like Plickers, and they're actively responding. They're actively thinking about what you're talking about. But the idea there is that learners must be manipulating something, and they must be actively observing the results of their manipulations. So this could be active learning, but it's probably not. If you think about the students here who are just sitting there doing not too much. Is this active learning? Think to yourself, is this active learning? Well, the consensus that I did in another class, that I heard in another class, is no, this is not necessarily active learning. This is just active. This is activity or physical activity. So they're not really manipulating something in their environment and observing the results. Is this active learning? Well, it could just be a brain break, right? It could just be students doing something in the classroom physically. But remember, active learning isn't just necessarily physically active, it's mentally active. Are students actually thinking about a concept and then we're acting out that concept? If in this picture that's what they're doing, then yes, it's active learning. If that's not what they're doing, they're just kind of getting a little exercise break, then it's probably not active learning. Again, it might just be physical activity. So this visual helps us to understand what active learning is more about. It's more about the mental activity, that there's activity going on in the mental or in the mind of students as they manipulate their environment and observe the effects. So when we think about technology, technology can support active learning in many different ways. It can provide a virtual environment for manipulation and observation, and the interactive whiteboard is certainly an example of this, where students are able to manipulate something on the interactive whiteboard and observe the effects. And hopefully they're thinking about why it came out maybe differently than what they thought. Technology can also provide media designed to activate mental processing. So you might watch a video that really makes you think about something, or an interactive experience. And technology can be used to support and document manipulation and observation in authentic tasks. So if we look back on our wiki for the class, there are lots of different active learning technologies listed on that wiki. And some of these might include things like Poplet, Storybird. Anytime students, again, are manipulating things in Poplet and observing those effects, there may be some active learning going on there, but especially with regard to the subject area when they have to create a concept map about something using Poplet, or a storybook about a certain concept or a certain idea using Storybird. So these are examples of technology for active learning. Classroom response systems, as I mentioned, is another one. But the key is not necessarily this. It's not necessarily that students are moving around. A lot of times teachers think active learning means students moving, students physically active. No, the key is more this. It's more about being active mentally as we think about active learning. So that's your task, is to support active learning with an interactive whiteboard software activity with students. And I think that's about it for this week as we move forward with this active learning idea. So have a wonderful week, and we'll see you later.